The smell of burning biscuits hit Gideon Lancaster's nose before he even dismounted from his chestnut mare outside the small ranch house in Silver Reef, Utah Territory, and he knew immediately that something was wrong inside the place where he had been invited for supper. It was March of 1879, and the desert wind still carried a bite of winter's chill, even as spring tried to assert itself across the red rock landscape that surrounded the Mormon settlement turned mining town. Gideon had been working as a ranch hand for the past 3 months on the neighboring property, ever since he had drifted into town with little more than his horse, his saddle, and a desire to put his past behind him in Texas. The invitation had come from Willa Lawson, an older rancher who needed help with his spring branding and had taken a liking to Gideon's work ethic and quiet demeanor. He tied his horse to the post and approached the door, hearing what sounded distinctly like sobbing from inside. His hand hesitated over the wood, unsure whether he should intrude, but the door suddenly swung open to reveal William himself, looking flustered and concerned. "Gideon, thank goodness you are here," William said, his weathered face creased with worry. "My daughter Willa is in quite a state. Her mother passed 2 winters ago, and she has been trying so hard to manage the household duties along with helping me with the ranch work. I am afraid today has been particularly difficult." Before Gideon could respond, William ushered him inside. The small but tidy home was filled with smoke, and through the haze, Gideon could see a young woman standing at the cast-iron stove, her shoulders shaking with sobs as she stared down at a pan of what could only generously be called biscuits. They were black as coal on the bottom, some cracked and broken, others lopsided and clearly inedible. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and hung around her face, and her apron was covered in flour and what appeared to be grease stains. "I cannot do anything right," she was saying through her tears, her voice breaking. "I cannot cook like Mama could. I cannot keep the house the way she did. I cannot be what Papa needs me to be. Everything I touch turns to disaster." William gave Gideon an apologetic look. "I am going to check on the horses in the barn. Perhaps you could help with supper." He retreated quickly, clearly uncomfortable with his daughter's distress. Gideon stood there for a moment, hat in his hands, watching this woman he had never properly met fall apart over burnt biscuits. She had not even noticed his presence yet, so consumed was she by her grief and frustration. He cleared his throat gently. Willa spun around, her eyes wide and red-rimmed, her face flushed with embarrassment and tears. She was perhaps 22 or 23, he estimated, with striking green eyes that were currently swimming with moisture and a face that would have been quite pretty if it were not contorted with misery. She tried to wipe her cheeks quickly, leaving flour streaks across her skin. "I did not know anyone was here," she stammered, trying to collect herself. "Please forgive me. I am Willa Lawson. You must be Gideon, the man Papa hired. He mentioned you would be joining us for supper, but as you can see, there will not be much of a supper to speak of." She gestured helplessly at the burnt biscuits. Gideon set his hat on the table and walked closer to the stove, looking down at the ruined bread. "May I try one?" he asked simply. Willa stared at him as if he had lost his senses. "They are burnt beyond recognition. You cannot possibly want to eat them." "I have eaten many a burnt meal on the trail," Gideon said, reaching for one of the least damaged biscuits. It was still hot, and he nearly dropped it, but he managed to break it open. The inside was actually not too bad, just the bottoms were truly burnt. He took a bite, chewing thoughtfully while Willa watched him with a mixture of horror and fascination. "These are the best biscuits I have ever tasted," he said after he swallowed. It was a complete lie, but something in him could not stand to see this woman cry any longer over something so small. "You are lying," Willa said, but there was hope flickering in her eyes now, replacing some of the despair. I am not, Gideon insisted, taking another bite. I mean it. The inside is perfect, light and fluffy. So what if the bottom got a little dark? That just adds character. On the trail, we would have fought over biscuits half this good. He reached for another one and bit into it, maintaining eye contact with her to prove his sincerity. A small laugh escaped Willa's lips, watery and uncertain but genuine. You are either the kindest liar I have ever met, or you have truly terrible taste in food. Maybe both, Gideon allowed, and he was rewarded with another small laugh. He kept eating the biscuits, one after another, scraping off the worst of the burnt bits but consuming them with apparent relish. In truth, they were not completely inedible, and he had certainly eaten worse during his years working cattle drives. But more than that, he found he would have eaten just about anything to keep that small smile on Willa's face. She watched him eat 3 more before she finally moved to wipe her eyes properly with her apron. I was supposed to make a whole supper. There is a roast in the other oven that is probably also ruined by now. Gideon walked over to the second oven built into the side of the large stove and opened it carefully. The roast inside actually looked perfect, brown and sizzling in its own juices. This looks excellent, he said. I think you got distracted by worrying about the biscuits and forgot this was turning out just fine. Willa came to look, and her face brightened considerably. Oh, thank goodness, I put potatoes in there too. She reached for a thick cloth to pull the heavy pan out, and Gideon quickly stepped in to help her. Their hands touched briefly on the cloth, and both of them froze for just a moment before Gideon lifted the roasting pan onto the stovetop. Why do you not sit down for a moment? Gideon suggested. Catch your breath. I can help get the rest of supper ready if you tell me what needs doing. Willa looked at him as if he had offered her the moon. You would do that, but you are a guest. I am a ranch hand who was invited for a meal, Gideon corrected. That does not make me a guest so much as someone who can help carry things to the table. Now sit. She sat, more from surprise than obedience, and watched as Gideon moved around the kitchen with surprising competence. He had grown up with 3 sisters before they had all succumbed to fever when he was 16, and his mother had made sure all her children knew how to manage a household. Those memories were painful, part of why he had left Texas, but right now they served him well as he found plates, carved the roast with a knife Willa pointed out, and scooped the potatoes onto a serving dish. There are green beans in the pot on the back of the stove, Willa said, starting to rise, but Gideon waved her back down. I see them. Just rest. William came back inside just as Gideon was setting the table, and his eyebrows rose in surprise. Well, now this looks fine. Willa, are you feeling better? Gideon helped, Willa said softly, and when she looked at him, there was something in her expression that made his heart beat a little faster. Gratitude, certainly, but also a kind of interest he had not expected. They sat down to supper, and William said grace in the Mormon fashion, though Gideon noticed he kept it brief. The meal was actually quite good, and Gideon made sure to compliment everything, which brought color to Willa's cheeks. She was beautiful when she was not crying, he realized, with an open face and expressive eyes that seemed to see right through his polite cowboy exterior to something deeper underneath. How long have you been working ranches? Willa asked him as they ate. Since I was 12 years old, Gideon replied. My father had a small spread in Texas, nothing like the big operations but enough to keep us fed. When my family passed from fever, I sold the land and started drifting. That was 8 years ago now. I am sorry for your loss, Willa said, and her voice carried real understanding. I know what it is like to lose people you love. My mother died 2 years ago this spring. She caught pneumonia during a late snow, and despite everything we did, she just got weaker and weaker until she was gone. It is the worst kind of pain, Gideon agreed. The kind that never fully heals, just scars over. William cleared his throat. Willa has been trying to manage everything her mother used to do while also helping me with the ranch work. She is quite skilled with horses, better than most men I have known, but the household tasks have been difficult for her. She and her mother never spent much time in the kitchen together. Margaret always insisted Willa should spend her time learning things she enjoyed, not just what was expected of a woman. Mama believed women should have choices, Willa said, a note of defiance in her voice as if she expected Gideon to disapprove. She taught me to ride, to rope, to shoot. She said I should be able to take care of myself no matter what happened in life. Sounds like she was a wise woman, Gideon said, and he meant it. Too many people get caught up in what is supposed to be instead of what makes sense. Willa's face lit up with surprise and pleasure. Yes, exactly. But since she passed, everyone in town expects me to suddenly become a proper housewife. The church ladies come by with advice about cooking and cleaning and tell me I need to find a good Mormon man to marry before I am too old and set in my ways. Willa has refused 3 proposals in the last year, William added with a mixture of pride and exasperation. Good men, all of them, but she will not be pushed into something her heart is not set on. A woman should be able to choose her own husband, Gideon said firmly. Marriage is hard enough without starting it with no affection. The way Willa looked at him then made Gideon's heart skip. It was as if she had been waiting her whole life for someone to say exactly that, to understand exactly how she felt. They held each other's gaze for a long moment before William cleared his throat again, this time with a knowing look on his weathered face. After supper, Willa insisted on cleaning up, but Gideon helped anyway, carrying dishes and wiping down the table while William excused himself to his room with a book. They worked in comfortable silence for a while before Willa spoke. "Thank you for what you did earlier," she said softly. "With the biscuits, I know they were terrible and I know you were just being kind, but I needed that kindness today. It has been a hard week. Today would have been my mother's birthday." Gideon stopped wiping the table and looked at her. "I understand. My mother's birthday is in April, and every year when it comes around, I feel like I am walking through fog for days." "Yes," Willa breathed. "That is exactly what it is like. And I got so caught up in thinking about her and trying to make supper the way she would have that I burned everything." "You did not burn everything," Gideon reminded her. "The roast was perfect, and honestly the biscuits were not as bad as you thought. I have eaten far worse." Willa laughed. "You are still lying about that, but I appreciate it." She finished drying the last plate and turned to face him fully. "Will you be working with Papa for the rest of the spring?" "That is the plan," Gideon confirmed. "He mentioned needing help through the spring branding and possibly into the summer if the work continues." "Good," Willa said, and then she seemed to realize how forward that sounded. She flushed and looked away. "I mean, it will be good for Papa to have consistent help. He is not as young as he used to be, though he hates to admit it." Gideon smiled. "I know what you mean." He hesitated, then added, "And it will be good for me to stay in one place for a while. I have been drifting for too long. It might be time to settle somewhere." "Silver Reef is a good place to settle," Willa said. "It has grown a lot since they found silver in the sandstone. Papa was one of the first ranchers here, back when it was mostly just Mormon settlers. Now we have miners and businesses and even a newspaper. It is becoming quite civilized." "You like that?" Gideon asked. "The civilization," Willa considered. "I like having a general store and a real doctor in town, but I miss the quiet sometimes before all the mining camps sprung up. The land around here is beautiful, especially in the early morning when the sun hits the red rocks. That has not changed, at least." I noticed that riding in, Gideon agreed. It is different from Texas, but beautiful in its own way. They talked for another hour, standing in the kitchen as the lamps burned down, and Gideon learned that Willa was 23, just a year younger than himself. She told him about growing up in Silver Reef, about the challenges of ranching in the Utah Territory where water was scarce and the weather unpredictable. She talked about her mother with both sadness and love, painting a picture of a strong woman who had defied expectations and raised her daughter to do the same. When Gideon finally left for the night, riding back to the small cabin he rented on the neighboring property, his mind was full of green eyes and flower-streaked cheeks and a laugh that sounded like hope. The next morning dawned clear and cold, and Gideon was up before the sun to help William with the branding. Willa appeared from the house as they were preparing the branding fire, dressed in split riding skirts and a wool coat, her hair braided back in a practical plait. "I am helping today," she announced, and though William looked like he might argue, he just nodded. "All right then. You can work the ropes with Gideon while I handle the branding iron." They worked together all morning, and Gideon was impressed by Willa's skill. She could rope a calf as well as any cowhand he had worked with, and she was not afraid of the hard physical labor. They developed a rhythm quickly, moving in sync as they caught, held, and released the calves one after another. When they stopped for a midday meal, both of them were sweating despite the cool air, and Willa had a smudge of dirt across her forehead that Gideon found utterly charming. "You are good at this," he told her as they sat on the fence rails eating the sandwiches she had brought. "Mama taught me," Willa said. "She said being good with animals was more important than being good with a needle and thread." "Do you think she was right?" Willa grinned. "Considering how my attempts at sewing usually turn out, definitely." Over the following weeks, Gideon and Willa fell into a pattern. He would work with William during the day, and Willa would often join them, especially for tasks that required an extra set of hands. In the evenings, Gideon was invited back to the house for supper more often than not, and while Willa's cooking gradually improved with practice, there were still occasional disasters that Gideon gamely ate anyway, always finding something positive to say. One evening in early April, Willa made a pie that came out so lopsided it nearly fell apart when she tried to serve it. Gideon ate 2 pieces and declared it delicious, even though the filling had clearly not been sweetened enough and the crust was tough as leather. "You are going to make yourself sick eating my mistakes," Willa said, but she was smiling. "I have a strong stomach," Gideon assured her. "Besides, I meant what I said that first night. I have eaten worse on the trail." "What was the worst thing you ever ate?" Willa asked, genuinely curious. Gideon thought about it. "When I was 19, working a cattle drive up from Texas to Kansas, we ran out of supplies 3 days from the nearest town. The cook tried to make bread with flour that had gotten damp and half spoiled. It was green in places and tasted like dirt and mold. But we were so hungry we ate it anyway." Willa made a face. "That is disgusting." "It really was," Gideon agreed. "Your worst cooking does not even come close." "That is a low bar to clear," Willa laughed. But it was not just the meals that drew Gideon back to the Lawson house. It was the conversations that stretched long into the evening, the way Willa challenged his opinions and made him think about things differently. It was the sound of her laughter and the way her whole face changed when she smiled. It was the growing realization that he was falling in love with her, deeply and completely, in a way he had never experienced before. He thought she might feel the same way. There were moments when their eyes would meet across the supper table and something electric would pass between them. Times when they were working together and their hands would brush and neither of them would pull away immediately. The way she always seemed to know where he was, turning to look for him before he even spoke, but Gideon held back from saying anything. He was a drifter with no property to his name, no family, no prospects beyond working other people's ranches. Willa deserved better than that. She deserved someone established, someone who could offer her security and a future. William, for his part, seemed to see right through both of them. One day in late April, as he and Gideon were mending fence line, the older man spoke up. "You have feelings for my daughter." It was not a question. Gideon stopped working and looked at William, trying to read his expression. "I do," he admitted, "but I have not acted on them. I know I am not the kind of man she should be considering." "Why not?" William asked bluntly. "You are honest, hardworking, respectful. You treat her as an equal, not a piece of property or a burden. Do you know how rare that is?" "I have nothing to offer her," Gideon said. "No land, no money saved beyond a few dollars. I have been drifting for 8 years. "So stop drifting," William said. "I need a partner in this ranch, Gideon. I am getting older and the work is getting harder. I had 2 sons, but they both died as children from fever before Willa was born. I always hoped one of the men Willa might marry would want to take on the ranch, but the 3 who proposed were all townsmen. One was a clerk, one was a shopkeeper, and one was a gambler pretending to be a prospector. None of them knew the first thing about ranching, and none of them cared to learn." Gideon's heart was pounding. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I could use a partner, someone who knows ranching, who respects the land and the work, someone who would eventually inherit this place and keep it going after I am gone." William fixed him with a steady gaze. "I am also saying that my daughter is happier than she has been in 2 years, and I think you have a lot to do with that. If you have feelings for her, and if she returns them, you have my blessing to court her properly." "I do not want you to think I have been working toward this," Gideon said quickly. "I never intended to try to gain anything beyond honest pay for honest work." "I know that," William said. "That is why I trust you. A scheming man would have been obvious about his intentions. You have been trying to stay away from my daughter despite your feelings, which tells me you care more about her well-being than your own desires. That is the kind of man I want for her." Gideon was quiet for a long moment, processing what William had offered. It was more than he had dared to hope for, more than he thought he deserved. "I would need to do this right," he finally said. "I would need to court her properly, let her make her own choice without pressure." "Of course," William agreed. "I would expect nothing less." That evening, Gideon asked Willa if he could speak with her alone after supper. They walked out to the corral where her horse, a pretty paint mare named Daisy, was grazing in the evening light. "Your father gave me permission to court you," Gideon said, deciding to be direct. "But what your father wants does not matter as much as what you want. So I am asking you, Willa Lawson, if you would allow me to court you properly." Willa turned to look at him, and in the golden light of sunset, she was so beautiful it made his chest ache. "I was wondering if you were ever going to ask," she said softly. "I have been waiting for weeks." "You have?" Gideon asked, surprised. "Did you think I did not notice the way you look at me?" Willa asked, stepping closer. "Or the way you always find excuses to be near me? Or how you ate those terrible burnt biscuits and pretended they were delicious just to make me stop crying? In my defense, some of your cooking has actually gotten quite good," Gideon said, and Willa laughed. "Some of it," she agreed, "but not those biscuits. Those were terrible and you knew it, and you ate them anyway because you are kind and good, and I think I started falling in love with you that very first night." Gideon's breath caught. "You are in love with me?" "I believe I just said that, yes," Willa replied, her eyes sparkling with amusement and something deeper, something that made Gideon's heart race. "I am in love with you too," Gideon said. "I have been for weeks now, maybe from that first night too. I just did not think I had any right to say so." "You have every right," Willa said firmly, "and I have every right to choose who I love, regardless of what anyone in this town thinks I should do." Gideon reached out and gently touched her cheek, brushing away a strand of hair that had escaped her braid. "May I kiss you?" "I wish you would," Willa whispered. He kissed her as the sun set over the red rocks of Silver Reef, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. It was gentle at first, tentative, and then deeper as Willa's arms came up around his neck and his hands found her waist. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Willa was smiling wider than Gideon had ever seen. "That was worth waiting for," she said. "We should probably go back inside before your father comes looking," Gideon said reluctantly. "Probably," Willa agreed, but she kissed him once more before taking his hand and leading him back to the house. The courtship that followed was proper by any standard, but it was also filled with joy and laughter and a deepening love that seemed to grow stronger every day. Gideon continued working the ranch with William, and the older man began teaching him more about the business side of things, the breeding decisions and the selling of cattle and the management of resources. True to his word, William started talking about making Gideon a partner officially, drawing up papers that would give him a share in the ranch. Willa and Gideon spent their evenings together, sometimes with William present, and sometimes chaperoned by neighbors when they went into town for church socials or community gatherings. The church ladies of Silver Reef were initially scandalized that Willa had finally accepted the courtship of a man, and a non-Mormon drifter at that. But Gideon's steady demeanor and obvious devotion to Willa gradually won most of them over. There was one woman, Sister Paulson, who remained particularly difficult. She had a son who had been one of Willa's rejected suitors, and she made her disapproval known at every opportunity. "That cowboy has nothing to offer you," she said to Willa one Sunday after services in early May. "My Benjamin has a steady business and a house in town. He could give you a comfortable life." "Your Benjamin is 20 years older than me and already had one wife who died under mysterious circumstances," Willa replied coolly. "I will take my chances with the cowboy, thank you." Sister Paulson's face turned red, but before she could respond, Gideon appeared at Willa's side. He had been waiting outside the church, as he did not attend the Mormon services himself, being raised Methodist. "Is everything all right?" he asked, looking between Willa and the older woman. "Everything is fine," Willa said, taking his arm. "We were just leaving." As they walked away, Gideon said quietly, "You do not have to defend your choice to people like that." "I know," Willa said, "but I want to. I want everyone to know I chose you freely and happily, and I would choose you again every single day." Gideon stopped walking and turned to face her. They were standing on the main street of Silver Reef, with miners and ranchers and families moving around them, but in that moment, it felt like they were the only two people in the world. "Marry me," he said suddenly. "I know we have only been courting for a month, but I know my own heart. I love you, Willa. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building a future together on the ranch, raising a family, growing old side by side. Will you marry me?" Willa's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears this time, nothing like the heartbroken sobs he had witnessed over burnt biscuits. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you, Gideon Lancaster, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." They were married on the 1st of June in 1879. The ceremony was held at the ranch, with a Methodist minister coming from the neighboring town to perform the service since Gideon was not Mormon and Willa had decided she cared more about marrying the man she loved than following all the church's expectations. Some of the Mormon community attended anyway, including several families who had known Willa her whole life and wanted to celebrate her happiness. Others stayed away in disapproval, but their absence did not diminish the joy of the day. Willa wore a simple dress of cream-colored cotton that she had bought from the general store and altered herself. It was not fancy, but she looked beautiful in it, with wildflowers from the desert braided into her hair. Gideon wore his best shirt and pants, clean and pressed, and William stood beside him as his best man since Gideon had no family of his own to invite. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Gideon kissed Willa in front of God and everyone, and the small gathering of guests cheered. They celebrated with a meal prepared by several of the neighbor women, and this time there were no burnt biscuits, though Gideon would have eaten them happily if there had been. The papers making Gideon a full partner in the ranch were signed that same day, with William insisting it should be done before the wedding so there could be no question that Gideon was marrying Willa for love, not for property. Not that anyone who knew them doubted it. The way they looked at each other made it abundantly clear that this was a love match through and through. Their first year of marriage was full of hard work and deep happiness. Gideon threw himself into learning every aspect of the ranch, determined to be worthy of William's trust and investment. Willa continued to work alongside them when she wanted to, and gradually took on more of the household management, though she never lost her love of riding and working with the horses. Her cooking continued to improve, though there were still occasional disasters that Gideon ate with good humor, always finding something genuine to praise. "These potatoes are a little burnt," Willa said one evening in September, looking at the pot she had left on the stove too long. "The tops are perfect," Gideon said cheerfully, scooping some onto his plate. "See, everything is fine." "You would say that even if the whole house was on fire," Willa laughed. "Well, yes, as long as you were safe," Gideon agreed. "The house can be rebuilt, you cannot be replaced." William rolled his eyes good-naturedly at their banter, but looked pleased to see his daughter so happy. He had aged noticeably in the past year, and both Gideon and Willa worried about him, though he insisted he was fine, just tired. In October, Willa realized she was pregnant. She told Gideon one evening when they were alone in the small cabin they had built on the property, separate from the main house to give them privacy. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply, watching his face for his reaction. Gideon's eyes went wide, and then a smile spread across his face so broad it looked like it might split his cheeks. "Truly, we are going to have a child in the spring," Willa confirmed. "April, I think, if I am counting right." Gideon swept her up in his arms, spinning her around carefully before setting her down and kissing her thoroughly. "I am going to be a father," he said in wonder. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Willa asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "I am beyond happy," Gideon said. "I thought I had lost the chance for a family years ago when fever took my parents and sisters. I thought I would spend my life alone, drifting from place to place with no roots. And then I found you, and you gave me everything I thought I had lost. A home, a family, a future. You gave me hope again, Willa." Willa's eyes filled with tears. "You gave me those things too. After Mama died, I felt so lost. I felt like I was failing at everything, like I could never be what Papa needed or what the world expected. And then you walked into our kitchen and ate those terrible burnt biscuits and looked at me like I was perfect exactly as I was. You saved me, Gideon." "We saved each other," Gideon said, pulling her close. William was overjoyed at the news of a grandchild coming. "Margaret would have been so happy," he said, his eyes misty. "She always wanted grandchildren to spoil." The winter was mild that year, and Willa's pregnancy progressed smoothly. Gideon was attentive and worried, hovering over her in a way that she found both endearing and occasionally irritating. "I am not made of glass," she told him when he tried to prevent her from riding out to check on the cattle in January. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I can sit on a horse." "I know," Gideon said. "I just worry." "I love that you worry," Willa said, softening. "But I also need you to trust that I know my own body and my own limits. I will be careful, I promise." "All right," Gideon agreed reluctantly. "But you take Daisy. She is the gentlest horse we have." They compromised often that winter, finding a balance between Gideon's protective instincts and Willa's fierce independence. It was not always easy, but they learned to communicate, to listen to each other, to bend without breaking. In March, William fell ill with a fever. It came on suddenly, and despite the doctor's best efforts, he grew weaker by the day. Gideon and Willa took turns sitting with him, keeping him comfortable, but they could both see that he was fading. "I am going to see Margaret soon," William said one evening, his voice weak but peaceful. "I can feel her waiting for me." "Do not talk like that, Papa," Willa said, but her voice cracked with tears. She was 7 months pregnant now, her belly round and obvious, and the thought of losing her father was almost too much to bear. "It is all right, sweetheart," William said. "I have lived a good life. I loved your mother with everything I had, and I got to see you grow into a strong, capable woman. I got to see you find love with a good man who will take care of you and this ranch. I am ready." "But I am not ready to lose you," Willa whispered. "You will never lose me, not really," William said. "I will always be with you in your memories, in the land we worked together, in the child you carry. Life goes on, Willa. That is the beautiful and terrible truth of it. Life always goes on." He died 2 days later, peacefully in his sleep. Willa was devastated, and Gideon held her while she cried, just as he had that first night, though this time it was not about burnt biscuits but about genuine, profound loss. They buried William on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a simple wooden cross marking his grave, next to the place where Margaret had been laid to rest 2 years earlier. The funeral was well attended. Whatever disapproval some in the community had held for Willa's choice of husband had faded over the past year, and people genuinely mourned William Lawson, who had been a pillar of the early settlement of Silver Reef. Sister Paulson even offered her condolences, though she could not resist adding, "At least he lived to know you would be taken care of." In the weeks after William's death, Gideon worried about Willa. She was grieving while also preparing for the birth of their child, and the combination of emotions seemed to drain her. But she was stronger than even she knew. She cried when she needed to, leaned on Gideon when the weight was too much, but she also kept moving forward, kept working, kept preparing for the future. "Mama and Papa both taught me that life goes on," she told Gideon one evening in early April. "I am sad, and I will miss him every day for the rest of my life, but I also have so much to be grateful for. I have you, and we have this ranch, and soon we will have a baby." Papa got to know all of that before he died. That is more than some people ever get. Their son was born on April 15th, 1880, on a warm spring morning with the windows open and the smell of desert flowers drifting through the house. The birth was long and difficult, and Gideon paced outside the bedroom door for hours while the doctor and a midwife attended to Willa. When he finally heard the baby cry, he nearly broke down the door in his rush to get inside. Willa was pale and exhausted, but she was smiling as the midwife placed the baby in her arms. "We have a son," she said to Gideon. "Come meet your boy." Gideon approached the bed with shaking hands, looking down at the tiny red-faced infant who was waving his fists and crying lustily. "He is perfect," Gideon breathed. "Willa, he is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Willa asked. They had discussed names but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Gideon knew exactly what felt right. "William," he said. "We should name him William after your father, but we can call him Will for short." Willa's eyes filled with tears and she nodded. "William Gideon Lancaster," she said. "That sounds right." The first years of Will's life were busy and full. The ranch thrived under Gideon's management, and they were able to hire 2 additional hands to help with the work, which gave Gideon more time to spend with his family. Willa balanced caring for Will with continuing to work with the horses, which she loved, and her cooking had finally reached a level where disasters were rare rather than common. "Remember when you burnt biscuits so badly you cried?" Gideon teased her one evening when she produced a perfect pan of golden brown biscuits for supper. "I remember you lying about them being delicious," Willa shot back, but she was smiling. "I still cannot believe you ate all of those terrible things." "Best decision I ever made," Gideon said, pulling her close despite Will protesting at being squished between them. "If I had not eaten those biscuits, you might not have fallen in love with me." "I would have fallen in love with you anyway," Willa said, "but the biscuits did speed things along." When Will was 2 years old, Willa became pregnant again. Their daughter was born in the winter of 1883, a tiny thing with dark hair like her mother and blue eyes like her father. They named her Margaret, after Willa's mother, and called her Maggie. Life settled into a rhythm that was sometimes hard but always good. They faced challenges, as all ranchers did. There were droughts and harsh winters, cattle that got sick, horses that needed breaking, fences that needed mending. There were good years and lean years, times of plenty and times when they had to be careful with every penny. But through it all, they had each other. Gideon would wake up every morning next to the woman he loved and count himself the luckiest man alive. Willa would watch Gideon teaching their children to ride or helping them with their chores, and feel her heart swell with love and gratitude. The town of Silver Reef changed around them. The silver mines that had brought prosperity began to play out in the mid-1880s, and the population declined as miners moved on to other opportunities. But the ranch remained steady, and Gideon and Willa adapted, focusing more on breeding horses than just cattle, which proved to be a smart decision. Willa's skill with horses was well known, and people came from all over the territory to buy horses trained by Willa Lancaster. They had 2 more children over the years, another son they named Samuel in 1885 and a daughter they named Grace in 1888. Their home was full of noise and laughter and sometimes chaos, but it was exactly the life both of them had dreamed of. On a warm evening in June of 1890, Gideon and Willa sat on the porch of their house, watching their 4 children play in the yard as the sun set over the red rocks. Will was 10 now, tall for his age and already showing promise as a horseman. Maggie was 7, with her mother's independent spirit and her father's steady patience. Samuel was 5, the wild one who was always getting into mischief, and little Grace was 2, toddling around and trying to keep up with her older siblings. "Do you remember the first time you came to this house?" Willa asked, leaning against Gideon's shoulder. "How could I forget?" Gideon said. "I smelled those burnt biscuits before I even dismounted from my horse." Willa laughed. "I was such a mess that day, I felt like I was failing at everything." "You were not failing," Gideon said seriously. "You were grieving and overwhelmed and trying to do too much, and you were still one of the strongest people I had ever met." "You barely knew me," Willa protested. "I knew enough," Gideon said. "I knew that you were worth staying for, worth fighting for, worth building a life with, and I have never regretted that decision for even a moment. Even when I burnt supper," Willa teased. "Especially then," Gideon said. "Because every burnt meal reminded me why I fell in love with you in the first place. You were not trying to be perfect. You were not pretending to be something you were not. You were just you, honest and real and beautiful. You are going to make me cry, Willa said, her voice thick with emotion. Happy tears this time, I hope, Gideon said, wrapping his arm around her. Always happy tears with you, Willa confirmed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their children and listening to the evening sounds of the ranch. The lowing of cattle in the distance, the whinny of horses in the corral, the rustle of wind through the scrub brush and cottonwood trees. It was a good life, a hard life, but it was theirs, built together from burnt biscuits and kindness and love. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Gideon thought about the long journey that had brought him here. From Texas to Silver Reef, from a grieving drifter to a man with a family and a home and a future. It had all started with a woman crying over burnt biscuits and a decision to be kind, to see past the disaster to the person hurting underneath. Thank you, he said suddenly. For what? Willa asked, turning to look at him. For everything, Gideon said. For giving me a chance, for loving me. For building this life with me. For those 4 amazing children who are currently trying to catch fireflies. For every single day we have had together, the easy ones and the hard ones, for all of it. Willa reached up and touched his cheek gently. I should be thanking you. You saved me that day, Gideon. You saw me at my lowest and you did not judge or pity me. You just ate those terrible biscuits and made me laugh when I thought I would never laugh again. You gave me hope when I had none left. We saved each other, Gideon said, echoing the words he had spoken years earlier on the night they learned about their first child. Yes, Willa agreed. We did. They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, and somewhere in the yard, their children shrieked with laughter over something only they understood. It was a perfect moment, the kind that could not be planned or manufactured, just the natural result of 2 people who had chosen each other and kept choosing each other every single day since. The years continued to pass, as they always do. The children grew, learning to work the ranch and develop their own skills and interests. Will proved to be a natural leader, taking on more responsibility as he got older. Maggie became an expert horsewoman like her mother, with an almost supernatural ability to understand what an animal needed. Samuel, after his wild childhood, settled into being the family's problem solver, always figuring out how to fix broken equipment or improve their systems. And Grace, the baby, grew into a sweet and thoughtful girl who loved books and learning but could also hold her own in the saddle when needed. Gideon and Willa grew older too, lines appearing around their eyes and silver threading through their hair. But they were happy lines, earned through years of laughter and love, and the silver was a badge of honor, proof that they had survived and thrived together. Silver Reef continued to decline as a mining town, eventually becoming something of a ghost town by the mid-1890s. But the ranch remained profitable, and the Lancaster family became well respected throughout the region. Gideon served on the Territorial Council for several years, working to help the area transition from mining to more sustainable industries like ranching and farming. Willa was known throughout Utah Territory for her horse training, and people would travel for days to seek her advice or purchase one of her horses. On their 15th wedding anniversary in June of 1894, Gideon surprised Willa by recreating their first meal together. He deliberately burnt a pan of biscuits, making them as black and terrible as the ones she had cried over all those years ago. When Willa saw them, she started laughing so hard she had to sit down. "What are you doing?" she asked between gasps of laughter. "Reminding us where we started," Gideon said, grinning. "Do you want to see if they are as bad as the originals?" "I think I will pass," Willa said, "but I appreciate the gesture." "Are you sure?" Gideon asked, picking one up. because I am prepared to eat every single one and tell you they are the best I have ever tasted." "You are ridiculous," Willa said, but her eyes were shining with love. "I am in love," Gideon corrected. "There is a difference." Their children, who were all home for the anniversary celebration, watched this exchange with a mixture of confusion and amusement. "Why would you deliberately burn biscuits?" Maggie asked. So Gideon and Willa told them the story, properly this time, about the first night they met, and the burnt biscuits and the tears and the lie that was also somehow the truth. "You told Mama her terrible biscuits were good?" Samuel asked, grinning. "I told her they were the best I had ever tasted," Gideon said. "And I meant it in a way because they brought me to this family. They brought me to all of you." "That is actually romantic," Grace said, surprising everyone since she was usually the most practical of their children. "It is romantic," Will agreed. "Papa saw Mama crying and wanted to make her feel better. That is what love is supposed to be, right? Seeing someone hurt and wanting to help. Among other things, yes," Gideon agreed, pleased that his son understood. As the sun set that evening, with their whole family gathered around the table eating a proper meal with perfectly good biscuits made by Grace, who had inherited her mother's improving cooking skills, Gideon looked around at the faces he loved most in the world and felt his heart full to bursting. "What are you thinking about?" Willa asked quietly. "I am thinking that I would do it all again," Gideon said. "Every single moment exactly the same. The drifting years, the hard work, the struggles, all of it, just to end up right here with you. Even eating those terrible biscuits." Willa teased. "Especially eating those terrible biscuits," Gideon said firmly, "because they were the gateway to everything I ever wanted." The children groaned good-naturedly at their parents' sentimentality, but they were smiling too, secure in the knowledge that they came from love, that they were wanted and cherished, that their family was built on a foundation of kindness and honesty and mutual respect. As the years turned into decades, Gideon and Willa watched their children grow into adults, marry, and have children of their own. Will married a rancher's daughter from the neighboring county and took over the day-to-day management of the family ranch. Maggie married a horse trader and started her own training operation, building a reputation that eventually spread beyond Utah territory into Colorado and Nevada. Samuel became an engineer, applying his problem-solving skills to designing better irrigation systems for the arid land, though he always came home to help during branding season. And Grace married a teacher and opened a school in what was left of Silver Reef, determined to make sure the children in the area had access to education. Gideon and Willa became grandparents many times over, and they loved every moment of it. They spoiled their grandchildren shamelessly, telling them stories about the old days and teaching them about ranching and horses and the importance of family. On a warm evening in June of 1904, their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. It was a large group now, with children and grandchildren, and even a few great-nieces and great-nephews from various branches of the family tree. Tables had been set up outside under the cottonwood trees, laden with food, and someone had brought a fiddle for music and dancing. As the sun began to set, painting the red rocks in shades of gold and pink, Gideon stood up and called for everyone's attention. "I want to thank you all for being here," he said, his voice still strong despite his 55 years. 25 years ago today, I married the love of my life, and it was the best decision I ever made. But it was not the first good decision I made regarding Willa." He turned to smile at his wife, who was sitting beside him, her hair now more silver than dark but her green eyes still as bright as ever. "The first good decision I made was to eat a pan of burnt biscuits, and tell her they were delicious," Gideon continued, and a ripple of laughter went through the crowd because the story was family legend by now. "I did it because I saw a good woman who was hurting, who was overwhelmed and grieving and trying so hard to be everything everyone expected her to be. I saw her crying over something small, but the tears were not really about the biscuits. They were about loss and pressure and fear of failure." The crowd had grown quiet, listening intently. "So I ate those terrible biscuits, and I told her they were good, and I made her laugh. And in that moment, I think we both realized that maybe we had found something special. Someone who would see past the surface to the heart underneath. Someone who would offer kindness without expectation. Someone who would love us for who we really were, not who we were supposed to be." Gideon reached for Willa's hand, pulling her up to stand beside him. 25 years, 4 children, more grandchildren than I can count sometimes. One successful ranch, countless burnt meals and good meals and everything in between. And I would do it all again, exactly the same, for the privilege of standing here beside this woman and calling her my wife. There was not a dry eye in the gathering by the time he finished. Willa was crying happy tears, and she reached up to cup Gideon's face in her hands. "I love you," she said simply. "Then, now, and always." They kissed while their family cheered. And then the fiddle struck up a dancing tune, and the celebration continued long into the night. The ranch continued to thrive under Will's management, with Gideon serving as an advisor, but no longer doing the hard physical labor. His aging body could not quite manage anymore. He and Willa spent their days working in the vegetable garden. Willa had started, riding out to check on the cattle when the weather was nice, and spoiling their grandchildren. They celebrated their 30th anniversary in 1909, then their 35th in 1914. The world was changing rapidly around them. Silver Reef had become a true ghost town, with most of the buildings abandoned or fallen into disrepair. But the ranch and the family remained strong. When the Great War broke out in Europe, Samuel enlisted despite his mother's tears and his father's concerns. He survived the war and came home changed but alive, and the family breathed a collective sigh of relief. Gideon and Willa grew older still, their movements slower but their love unwavering. They would sit together on the porch in the evenings, just as they had done for decades, watching the sun set over the red rocks and remembering all the moments that had brought them to this place. "You have any regrets?" Willa asked one evening in the summer of 1920. They were both in their 70s now, and they knew that their time together was precious. "Not a single one," Gideon said without hesitation. "You, only that we did not have more time," Willa said. "I would like 100 more years with you." "That would be nice," Gideon agreed. "But I am grateful for the years we have had. They have been good years, Willa. The best years anyone could ask for." "Because of you," Willa said. "Because of us," Gideon corrected. "We built this together." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, holding hands as they had done 1,000 times before, secure in the knowledge that whatever time they had left, they would face it together. Gideon passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1922, at the age of 73. Willa was devastated but not surprised. He had been declining slowly over the winter, and they had both known the end was coming. She held his hand as he took his last breath, and she whispered that she loved him, and she saw the small smile on his face that told her he had heard. They buried him on the hillside where her parents were laid to rest, with a simple stone marker that read, "Gideon Lancaster, beloved husband, father, and friend. He saw the best in everyone." Willa lived for another 5 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on the stories and the lessons and the love that had defined her life with Gideon. She never remarried, though several widowers in the area expressed interest. There had only ever been one man for her, and she had been blessed enough to spend over 40 years by his side. When Willa passed away in the autumn of 1927, at the age of 71, the family laid her to rest beside Gideon on the hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together. Her stone marker read, "Willa Lancaster, beloved wife, mother, and teacher." She lived with courage and love. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own stories and memories to the legacy that had started with burnt biscuits and kindness. The story of how Gideon and Willa met became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. A reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories start with the smallest acts of compassion. The house where Willa had cried over burnt biscuits still stood, maintained carefully by the family as a connection to their past. The kitchen had been updated over the years, but descendants of the Lancaster family would sometimes deliberately burn a pan of biscuits on anniversaries or special occasions, remembering the moment that had changed everything. And if you visited the hillside where Gideon and Willa were buried, you would see that their stones were always decorated with wildflowers, placed there by family members who wanted to honor the love that had created them all. The view from that hillside was spectacular, looking out over the red rocks and desert landscape that had been the backdrop for their extraordinary, ordinary life together. Their story lived on, not just in the family but in the land itself, in the horses that still carried the Lancaster name and reputation, in the ranch that had survived and thrived for over a century, in the values of kindness and respect and genuine love that they had instilled in every generation that came after them. It had all started with burnt biscuits and a kind lie that was also the deepest truth. Gideon had told Willa those were the best biscuits he had ever tasted, and in the most important way they were. They were the biscuits that had brought him home, that had opened the door to a life he had never dared to dream of, that had given him everything he had ever wanted: love, family, purpose, belonging. All of it had been there in that moment when he chose kindness over honesty, when he saw past the burnt bread to the hurting heart of the woman who had made them. That choice had rippled forward through time, creating waves of love and happiness that touched hundreds of lives across multiple generations. And that, more than anything, was the true legacy of Gideon and Willa Lancaster. Not the ranch or the horses or the material success, but the proof that one moment of genuine compassion could change everything, that seeing and valuing another person in their moment of vulnerability was the foundation on which the strongest love could be built. Their story ended as all stories must, with death and the passage of time. But it also never ended, because the love they had shared and the family they had created continued forward, carrying their memory and their lessons into a future they would never see but had helped to shape. And somewhere on that hillside in southern Utah, as the sun set over the red rocks and painted the sky in impossible colors, if you listened carefully, you might almost hear the echo of laughter, the sound of a man and a woman who had found each other against all odds and had built something beautiful together from the humblest of beginnings. All because of burnt biscuits, kindness, and the courage to love completely.